so that was sort of presaged it, but then I sort of just got this fully formed notion of the need to break with my brother, and then that's exactly what I did, right? And then what happened was I didn't speak to him for a couple of weeks, and then he wrote me an email. Oh, so there's one other thing that I want to talk about just before that. We have time, because I'm not a big speeder. Which was that my brother took something called the Landmark Forum. And the Landmark Forum comes out of Est. Werner Eckhart was a California kind of guru, kind of philosopher, and he developed something called Est, which was a sort of confronting people's personal demons in a pretty intense 3-day session where you're sort of there for 18 hours a day and you can't go and pee and stuff like that. And then this developed into something called, after he had a tangle with Scientology, they accused him of child molestation, he fled overseas, all this sort of mess. He ended up developing this thing called the Landmark Forum. And I'll talk about my own experiences with it another time, but my brother took this, and one of the things that he complained about in the Landmark Forum was that he had a bad relationship with me. And so one of the things that they said was, well, what's the reasons? And of course he said, oh, I don't know. Never accept that from somebody. Never accept when they say, I don't know, that they know. They always know. I mean, if you're not talking about the capital of Mozambique from somebody who just came off a spaceship, they always know. Like when it comes to, what is your brother's or sister's motivation for doing this? And they say, well, I don't know. Nonsense. You always know. You just don't want to listen to yourself. So my brother was like, oh, I don't know. So they kept confronting him and kept pushing him. And finally he burst into tears and says, well, he's been a writer for 15 years and I've never read anything that he's written. Right? So he knew exactly what one of the problems was. And it was a problem. He'd never read anything that I'd given him stuff to read, but he just never read it. And so he knew exactly what the issue was. So, of course, he comes over to so they give him this thing, go and read your brother's stuff, right? So he comes over to my house. This is when I was in graduate school. He comes over to where I was living. And he's sort of 1 o'clock in the morning, gets me out of bed and says, I want to read your stuff. So I'm like still naive and still untutored and idiotic. And so I get up and I print off one of my novels and he starts reading it. And he starts giving me comments on it and we stay up till like 5 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock in the morning reading it. And then he catches an hour nap and goes back to the forum and so on. And yeah, I guess I could say that I sort of felt that this was like a breakthrough, like he'd understood something, and but of course it never happened again, right? I mean, like, the defenses that are torn down, almost with everybody, almost instantly rebuild themselves. And so that is just too common for words, and it's not even really worth speaking about it. But don't be fooled when people open up. Now, when people open up, who have had a long history of not opening up, it is not going to last. It is not going to last. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible for it to last. I'm just saying statistically it's not going to last. You have to, it has to continue for at least 2 to 3 months, this sort of openness and vulnerability and willingness to talk about stuff, and they have to initiate it too, and then you will know that it is progress. But don't be fooled by some big tear fest or some big opening up or some big mutual understanding and some big, it feels like a big step forward. It has been my experience that this kind of intimacy often is the last gasp of a dying fire, right? So if you have relationships, long-term relationships, and I've experienced this before, where there's a sudden flaring of intimacy and an opening up and so on, this usually then ends up being like the dying gasp of the relationship. So you think it's a step forward, but it really is just the scream as somebody goes off a cliff into the void of no self, right? So it is a very easy thing to be fooled by, and I've been fooled by it a number of times, but now I'm aware that where there is intimacy, it is usually the last gasp of possible intimacy. It is the sealing of a tomb, not the opening of a new vista. So this definitely occurred with this reading. I mean, up all night reading my stuff, and he's like, oh, this is great, this is nice, I'm interesting. He's got some intelligent comments to make about it. And that's, unfortunately, though, it never happens again, right? I mean, that's one time. He never read anything else that he never even read the book that I got published. He's never, ever. And I mean, it's because he can't handle the inner world, right? His own inner world is so tiny and constrained and self-destructive that the rich imagination and a rich envisioning and empathy to characters is just far more than he can handle, right? He likes a good he likes a good story about the SAS in Vietnam or something. I mean, that's the level that he likes to read at. Violence and coolness and stuff like that. And it's not because he's not intelligent, it's just that he's emotionally undeveloped and sadistic, so he likes stories about cruelty and violence and the excellence in martial arts rather than anything that's sort of empathetic and stirring, I think.